Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Allison. Today's guest is Dr. Mark Halper. He is a successful chiropractor who is now a certified HeartMath practitioner, and his practice is now the Coherent Revolution. I can't wait to get into this conversation to hear about his journey and his story of overcoming adversity. Hey, Dr. Mark, welcome to the Overcoming Adversity podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here, man.
Yeah, good morning. Nice to be here.
Absolutely, man. So you're calling in from snowy, balmy Toronto, man. I know that cold weather could be daunting for some people, but you chose to be here on the podcast, man. So just thank you for being here, brother.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here today.
So, man, if you can, tell me a little bit about the concept of coherence and how did you come into this practice? Because you were a chiropractor, you were successful doing it, but then you chose to have a career shift. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Coherence Revolution was really decades in the making. I was a kid. I had a sort of a normal childhood. I was happy. I had lots of friends. You know, everything seemed, I'd say, just great until maybe the typical teenage years. And during, let's say, 12, 13, 14 years of age, I started developing quite a bit of anxiety over the regular insecurities that teenagers might have. And, you know, this is back in the 80s, and you didn't really talk about it with your parents or friends or really anybody. And so I just kind of developed all these really terrible, I'm going to call them patterns in my life. And anxiety just got worse until I was maybe 18, 19 years of age. That's when I first told my parents, I think I'm suffering from anxiety. And I went to my first lecture when I was probably 18 or 19 years old. And then I'm going to say over the next 10, 15, 20 years, I was just on a never ending search for answers. It was always about anxiety. It was whether it was medication, whether it was books, whether it was courses. I really tried everything and anything I could get my hands on to try and what I thought was get rid of this anxiety and never have to deal with it again. Because I always envisioned that there'd be a time that I would have worked through all of the anxiety and then boom, I'd be able to essentially start my life. But, you know, I went through my 20s, I went through my 30s, even through some of my 40s, suffering terribly with anxiety on and off. And, you know, combine that with, I became a chiropractor when I was 24. And so for many years, you know, as a chiropractor, I'm helping people with back pain and neck pain. But slowly over the years, my practice started to shift to helping people with stress, because a lot of pain and back pain and neck pain can actually, you can kind of relate it back to how stress has affected your brain and nervous system. And so from sort of my late 20s, early 30s, I started investigating both professionally and personally how to deal with stress, how to deal with anxiety. And I found some things like some of the breath work that I talk about in the book, and especially HeartMath, which is something that changed my life starting back in around 2005. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more. But as I learned this breath work and started to teach it to my patients over several years, I just started doing work informally with my patients, stress and breath work and how to deal with, different techniques of how to deal with stress. But if we fast forward a little bit so that the story is not too long, comes the pandemic in 2020. And I was told to essentially go home by the government and I couldn't work for 12 weeks. And so based upon personally who I am, which is if I'm doing nothing at home, that's going to trigger some anxiety. And based on professionally, I needed to be able to work and look out for my family for the future. I just started to combine everything that I'd always learned. And so the first thing I did was write a book. Literally for those 12 weeks, I treated it like a job. I'd get up in the morning and I'd write day and night. And basically the book started out as me just putting down everything I'd ever learned about anxiety, and everything I learned didn't work about anxiety. And that's really became Coherence Revolution, the book. It talks about my journey, talks about everything that worked, everything that didn't work. And I looked at it as almost like a guide for people who wanted to save themselves a lot of time and a lot of money, and maybe avoiding some of the things that didn't work for me and starting to learn from the things that did work for me. And at the same time, since I had learned HeartMath many years before, I became certified. This is maybe a little bit before the pandemic, I had started getting certified. And so I thought I can put this online and really create a course where The heart, no pun intended, the heart of the course was about the breathwork, HeartMath. And then
Right.
I thought, well, that's good material, and it's really good for people to learn. But I wanted it to be more about how can you take back control of your life, because HeartMath is a simple breathwork tool that you can learn. But then I realized there's so many other ways to also get you back into this coherent state, such as using your senses, using your sight, sound, taste, using the world around you, the people you experience life with, the environments that you spend time in. We can make all of these things much more coherent. And so, if I take a step back, and I think most people are saying, what is coherence? Coherence is that state where you are your true self. Coherence is that state where you're an athlete and you say, I was really in the zone. Coherence is when you're a band and you're playing and you go, wow, we were really in sync with each other tonight. That's coherence. And in our body, when your heart wave gets into such a smooth in and out breath, and it starts to get into a smooth sine wave, which you can measure with some technology, as your heart wave, as your heart rate starts to get into a very smooth sine rhythm, it starts to entrain your brain. And it starts to entrain the higher rhythms of your brain, the higher centers of your brain, so that it affects your decision making. It affects the way you interact with your people around you. It affects the way you deal with pain, affects your immune system. And so you can start to use the ability to get your heart into a good rhythm to essentially change the way your brain works. And that is called a coherent state. And it's not just something that you think you know. When you're in coherence, you feel it. When you walk by a stream and you take that deep breath, when you're climbing a mountain and you go, oh, I'm one with nature, that's coherence. But you can do
Well,
that.
let me ask you this question, Dr.
Please.
Marks. So, for one to get to that particular state, and for someone that was on that journey of going through that struggle, can you tell us a little bit about how did that impact you for you to even get to this particular state? So, if you could tell our audience, right, what were some of the symptoms? What were some of the problems that you were facing and dealing on a daily basis that could relate to our audience?
So I think, fairly typical. The fact is that my anxiety, though, was unrelenting. It was just every day. It didn't matter. It was the fear. I described it as the fear of almost like you're about to jump out of a plane. But that was my everyday, whether I was going to work, going out with friends, at home with family. I always had anxiety. And so I was saying earlier, my goal at first was to get rid of anxiety and one day live this life without anxiety. But what's become evident to me and very clear is that you don't want to fully get rid of anxiety, because you need the fight or flight response. It's important. And we're always going to have anxiety. But what getting into coherence did for me, and I call it my superpower, is that in any given moment, if I'm anxious, I know it can take me 30 seconds to a minute to get out of that state, to consciously change my emotional state. And so I started practicing emotions like inspiration, happiness, gratitude, love, inspiration. I would just practice these emotions, anything that could elicit them. And you see, anxiety is a bit of a habit, and it can almost become an addiction, where your brain gets used to producing the chemicals of stress. And as it does that, it gets more and more, it gets better and better at producing those chemicals of stress. And so now anything starts to produce this anxiety feeling. It can go the other way too. And as I started to practice uplifting emotions, I gained a confidence that even when I was anxious, I could change my emotional state. And so whether it's about to go into a meeting where you're stressed out, whether you're coming home from work and you need to reset, whether you get up in the morning and you're facing a day of unrelenting stress or anxiety or depression, or you're emotional, the fact is when you start to figure out how to get into coherence, you can change your emotional state. Doesn't mean it's going to be there forever. I know for me, the more I practice it, the more time I spend in coherence, the less time I'm spending in anxiety, the easier and easier it gets to create those emotional states. But it is a
For
practice.
for listeners that are listening and could be struggling right now with that emotional state, right? what are some practical steps that they could take from what you're teaching in regards to like gaining that level of coherence?
So in the book, I go through a couple of things. I go through each of our senses. And so literally you can start setting yourself up for success. For instance, I took about a week, and during that week, I listened to every type of music I could get my hands on, literally just to see how I responded to it. And I took notes. What type of music uplifted me? What type of music annoyed me? What type of music brought me down? What type of music brought me up? Relaxed, inspired. So now I had literally a list of all the different music I could play in any given moment to inspire me or to relax me, or to start using it to gain more coherence. But I think that the most important, and I think, as I was saying, the center of my book is about HeartMath, which is this technique of getting your heart and brain into coherence. So the first thing that I'd like you to do is, when you're breathing, most people are chest breathers. We breathe like this. We breathe up. And if you look at what happens is your lungs actually come up and they get compressed, which means that you're literally setting off a stress response just by your breathing. And there's a concept that everybody should understand called heart rate variability. When you breathe in, your heart rate goes up. When you breathe out, your heart rate goes down. The difference is called your heart rate variability. So let's say I breathe in and my heart rate goes up to 90, and then I breathe out and my heart rate goes down to 70. 90 minus 70 is 20. Your heart rate variability would be 20. The larger your heart rate variability, the more adaptable you are to life. So in other words, the more stress you can handle, the more you can tolerate. But those chest breathers, most of you out there, are doing like this. And as the chest heaves, your heart rate variability is like 2 or 5. And if you looked at it on a graph, you'd see these jagged waves or jagged kind of points, as opposed to a smooth heart rate variability. So the very first step to all of this is really starting to change your breathing technique. So the simple, I call it getting neutral. And the first thing I would tell you to do is to put a hand on your upper chest and a hand on your belly. And with your in-breath, you're going to breathe in through your nose for about 4 seconds. You're going to breathe in intensely, and you're going to fill your belly up. So your hand is on your belly, and you're going to fill it up just like a balloon. And once you've gotten it filled up, you're going to breathe out through pursed lips for 6 seconds. The reason you're doing a longer out breath is because when you breathe in, you stimulate the sympathetic system, which is stress. When you breathe out, you stimulate the relaxation system, the parasympathetics, which is relaxation and healing. So if you elongate your out breath, you're going to stimulate the relaxation system of your body. And you get into what I call this 4-6 breathing. And if you do it in a nice rhythmic fashion with your tummy coming out and in, you're going to start establishing essentially a sine wave, which is a coherent wave. And that's the very first step in learning HeartMath. And so before we get into even practicing an emotional state, if you're about to go into a meeting, or you're stressed out about to go into work or home or interacting with people, just do some neutral breathing, some 4-6 breathing for maybe 2 to 3 minutes, and you'll see that you're in a completely different physiological state than when you started.
Wow, thank you for that, man. That was very helpful in regards to like learning how to put those practical steps into place. That's something that we could do actually every single day.
Anyway.
I want to follow up and ask you this: for someone that's listening that has never heard of this before, can you talk a little bit about how is this different from traditional therapy? And then can you talk a little bit about some of the results that your clients have seen from working with you?
Sure. So as I mentioned before, I've been doing this type of work really since I was about 20 years old, and learning all these different techniques. And the fact is it's not just one person it can help. It can help everybody by learning how to use these techniques. I think the problem I got in when I started therapy was I always thought that I would get rid of my problems. And the biggest, an example, you go to see a talk therapist. I found catharsis was beneficial. I loved getting it out. But 10 minutes after leaving my therapist's office, I felt like I needed to get more out. I needed to talk about it over and over. I've never met anybody that has talked themselves out of their problems. Just doing the talk therapy isn't getting rid of anything, because 80% of what we do on a daily basis are neurological subconscious programs that happen over and over and over again. So it's not you, it's these little kids, these parts of you that I call your bodyguards, the little parts of you that are tantruming, that they want things to go their way. That's not your coherent true self. That is the subconscious part of you that's literally fighting to be heard and wants you to go through those same patterns. And so the biggest thing that I learned is, although I encourage therapy, I've seen a therapist on and off my whole life. It's not that I'm against seeing a talk therapist, but the idea is to create new patterns. If you don't start creating these new patterns of what you focus on, how you breathe, how you pay attention to the world around you, if you don't start creating new patterns, you're just going to keep repeating the old ones. And that's why in the course that I teach, HeartMath is a huge part of it, but it's also about setting up the rest of your world so that you're setting yourself up for success. You know, your environment at home might be different than your environment at work, might be different than the environment you drive in, right? You might want to use essential oils in your car that uplift you, but then you might want to use essential oils at home that relax you. So the idea is that the more conscious you are about how to change your emotional state, the more effective it's going to be. And so in my course, I started having women and men, really of all ages. I had women as young as 25, men in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. I had women in their 60s and 70s, everybody taking the course. And although they're all learning the same techniques, they're applying it to their lives differently. So I had a woman who was in her 40s. She had a young family and a husband. But like most women who are trying to work and, raise a family and everything, she was totally overwhelmed. She wasn't getting enough help at home. She had no time for herself. She was always on the verge of tears and anxious and depressed. And as she started to learn the breathwork, and as she started to dig into each of her senses and design her life, one of the exercises she did was literally be able to tell her family what she needed and how her new life was going to be, that on certain nights of the week, she was going to read for an hour, or she was going to meditate, or she was going to make plans with friends. And during those times, the rest of the family had to step up to the plate and basically play their role so that the household would continue to function. So after the course, she related to me that A, she now knows how to relax herself when necessary. B, her home environment has completely changed because her family's supporting her on her journey. And then at work, she was actually getting more done because now she wasn't always overwhelmed and stressed out. I had a 45-year-old man who owned his own electrician company, and he joined the program thinking that he was doing me a favor because he was a patient of mine. And then he joined, and he said afterwards that he couldn't believe the changes that he now made, because he spoke to his wife about some changes they needed to make in the relationship. He talked to his employees and told them he never listened to them well enough, and he started listening to them more, and all of a sudden he made some procedures at work that were different. And his anger subsided because he learned the breath work and he knew he could take charge of his emotions. And so literally the material, you could look at it 10 different people, but you're all going to implement the material differently, except for the HeartMath breathwork, which is a tool that anybody and everybody can learn and use on the spot without anybody really being aware, on the bus, in a car, in a meeting, or at home. And so, for me, the powerful aspect of this is being able to talk to people after the program and be able to see how many changes they've made. And most of the time, it's things that I never would have even dreamt of.
Can you tell us a little bit about your book, man? Because learning all about what you've done and what you've created is truly phenomenal. And to hear the success of people's life that you're changing, man, I think could be quite beneficial. So can you talk a little bit about your book and what readers
Sure.
could get from the book?
Sure. So the book, at first, I'm going to say it was divided into sort of three. The first part is about me, my journey through anxiety, the things that helped. I talk about my journey with music and some of the bands I listened to, and some of the things that were hard for me growing up. And I think some people will relate to sort of their journey and be able to put themselves in the same positions. The second part is all about the techniques and therapies and books and all the different procedures that I tried to help myself with anxiety. And I talk about the ones that worked and the ones that didn't work, from the books and mentors and products and things that I've tried. And in the third part, it was really about diving into each of our senses. And there's questions that you can answer for yourself. And really, it's a bit of a roadmap. And I find you can benefit from doing the book, but during the course, we really dive into all of it, and you get coaching on how to not only how to learn the breath work, because in the book you don't learn the breath work, you learn about it, but you don't learn the breath work. You learn the breath work in the course, but ultimately, the last thing you do in the course or the book is something that I call a daily time schedule. And it is a really unique thing that what you're doing is you're designing your life from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. You're going to put in all the things that you prioritize, from the people you want to see to the things you want to do, working, eating, sleeping, personal time, meditation, date night, whatever you want to put in there. So now you're going to have a schedule that you can follow. But what you're going to do is you're going to take it to the next step, because during the whole course, you're doing a deep dive into all the things that can change your emotional state, from the music to the sounds to the sights to the people to the clothing you wear, all of the things that can change your emotional state, with the goal of looking at your daily time schedule and identifying the emotions that you want to feel at different times of the day. So for instance, if you want to wake up in the morning and be inspired for your day, that's a lot different than on your way home wanting to be at peace and more relaxed for the evening. And so once you start to identify the emotions you want to feel during the day, you can start to use your lists of things that you know will elicit those emotions. And so the idea is to start practicing the emotions of your dream life. And if you think about that for a moment, you start to practice the emotions of your dream life even before you've achieved your dream life. The dream life seems infinitely more possible to achieve when you're starting to practice the emotions of that life already. Because once you start to feel like you have that life, it's much more easy to attain it because you've already feel like you have it. And so the idea is to start living as if you are living those emotions so that you can start to produce the outcomes that you'd like to see. And that's really the purpose of the Coherence Revolution, is that you can spend as much time in coherence as possible throughout your day using breath work or the world around you.
What would you say about to the person that's listening and they have this anxiety, they have this fear, and they're facing it as they're going through this adversity, and they're looking for some practical ways to get into going through all of the Coherent Revolution, going through your training, going through your course? What are some steps that they could take in regards to getting past this fear and saying, this should work for me, this could possibly work for me?
Well, I use an example in my book. I talk about everybody has the ability to change their emotional state. And I use the example of, let's say you're at home. I know there were times I was at home and I was a complete mess. Anxiety was coming through my pores. And I picture people being at home. Some people cry, some people scream, some people just sit there in a frozen state and they're just, anxious or depressed. Now picture the doorbell rings and you're expecting a package, or you've got to answer that door. In that moment, what most people do is they completely suck it up for that moment, and they open the door and they've got this fake smile and hi, how are you? And they're another person, and they're faking it for that 30 seconds. But if you're honest with yourself, in those 30 seconds, you feel uplifted, you feel inspired, and you are in that moment, and you don't feel the same type of anxiety you did 30 seconds ago. But most of you is just praying that this person's going to leave as quickly as possible so you can shut the door and get right back to being anxious and miserable and emotional. But the fact is you had the ability to change like that because your emotional energy that you put towards opening that door outweighed the emotional state that you were in. And so that's what it's going to take. If you're sitting there in a ton of anxiety, if you got up right now and played your favorite song and danced as hard as you could in the moment, as if no one's watching you, I guarantee you're going to change your emotional state, even if it's only for a minute. But the fact is the more you change your emotional state consciously, the more you practice it, the more you do it over and over and over again, the easier it becomes and the more it can become your new normal state. So yes, the first time you do it, put on the song, you're kicking and screaming, you don't want to do it in your head, but you put on the song, you dance, you feel a little better. You might go back to crying or being anxious in a few minutes. That's okay. But keep doing it, keep trying it, keep doing the breathing. The idea is to have a toolbox of as many different ways to change your emotional state. But there are some drastic ones like putting on music and dancing that'll shake you up right in the moment. And so you have to get outside of yourself. You have to not be too ashamed to go in front of a mirror and smile. The fact is if you go in front of a mirror and you smile, just the act of smiling, the muscles of smiling produce happy chemicals in your brain. And so if you're miserable, go to a mirror and smile. You might feel ridiculous, but it's going to start producing the happy chemicals. It's going to break the pattern and you're on your road to recovery. So it's about doing these things and being consistent with them, no matter how silly, no matter how you don't think it's going to work for you, you got to do them.
Man, you're so 1000% correct. I was thinking about this as you were saying that, and I'm looking in the mirror, getting dressed and getting prepared, and I'm smiling. I'm encouraging myself. And you should have probably seen me about an hour ago. I was up in here just having a good time because I really enjoy what I'm doing. Another thing that I was going to say is me and my wife was driving the other day, and it's obviously it's the holiday time, and we're looking at the different Christmas lights and how these lights change our behaviors, change our attitude, and it just sends a different message in regards to
Right.
us being much more joyful, being much more happy, just from people putting up Christmas lights.
Right.
And it's so interesting you're saying that concept. So, Dr. Mark, if you could tell us, man, what are some key takeaways? What are some key principles that people could extract from your story, from your book, from your life, and they could start applying that into their life, man? Because your story is one of pretty phenomenal, man, of dealing with anxiety for such a long time, ever since a child, and now you're putting it into practice and helping people.
I think it's important to make the distinction that you're not trying to get rid of anything. You're trying to change your emotional state. You're trying to uplift yourself. You're not trying to get rid of anxiety or depression, or if you're just feeling, like you're not doing as well in your life as you like. Some people don't. But the idea is you're not trying to get rid of anything. You're trying to add. You're
Mhm.
trying to change your emotional state, and that you can do it. Anybody can do it. I suffer. I still suffer with anxiety. I am not better. I am just really good at changing my emotional state. And so when I have a trigger, I now have a toolbox that I am good at, and I can get out of the emotional state that I'm in and change it. And so I think it's powerful for people. There's people who are way down, and there are people that are sort of just knowing that their life could be better. This work is for you. It doesn't matter if you're a 10 out of 10 severity or you're a 2 out of 10. It's really about you creating a better life for you and having the tools to do it. And so during the program, essentially you're going to be getting help and coaching and through the group and through personally with me. And the idea is that you're looking at what works for you. So you have to be a little bit more inquisitive about your life. You have to look around the world around you and figure out what does work for you. Maybe you have to identify people in your life that just aren't working for you. And instead of trying to make it work, be okay with letting them go. This is the idea, is to dig into each part of your life. And so in my course, it's a 12-week course, but it's designed that it could take you a year to go through the whole thing if you do it really effectively, or you can do it a few times, because you're always trying to increase your toolbox of what's going to work for you in your life. And so if you're feeling discouraged and you don't think that you can do the work, I mean, really start breathing, start doing some stomach breathing, and start to do things that uplift you and see how you feel, right? Start doing the things that put you in a better mood, and then try to make decisions from that state of mind.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Mark, thank you so much for being a guest on the Overcome Diversity podcast, man. Can you tell us how can we get a hold of you? How can we book you to learn more about your courses? Where can we find you on social media?
Sure. You can find me if you search up on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn under Coherence Revolution. You'll find me. If you go to the website www.coherencerevolution.com, you can find out all about the program. But what I encourage you to do, because this is a bit of a new concept for most people. They've never heard of the word coherence, or they don't know anything about my program. And I don't want people signing up, kind of hesitant. And so what I'm offering are these discovery calls. I have found that when I speak to people one-on-one, you start to understand a little bit what I do, and a little bit, you can find a little bit more about what you're looking for, and we can discuss your goals. There's no fees for this. It's just, we'll take 10, 15 minutes and we'll chat together. And if the course is right for you, I'm going to encourage you to do it. And if it's not the right place for you, we'll talk about maybe where the right place for you is. But these discovery calls is a chance for you to just pick my brain a little bit and see if the work I do is up your alley. So you can book those for free off my website, coherencerevolution.com. And if you choose to do that, then great. I look forward to speaking with you and seeing you soon.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Mark, thank you so much for being a guest on Overcoming Adversity podcast, man. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Guys, if you like this episode, make sure you leave a message. But you could also share this with a family and a friend, as we know that many are going through adversity, many are facing anxiety, and we know that this podcast episode can be a help. So make sure you like, share with a family and friend. Until next time, God bless.
Can't complain at all. Couple dollars in my pocket, know it come and go. Been working on my body, getting healthier. Thank God for clarity.